The rain came down in thick gray sheets, washing the dust and heat from the streets of the capital city. For the pedestrians huddled under awnings and the cars crawling through the sudden deluge, it was an inconvenience. For Sergeant First Class Elias Vance, standing at the base of the granite steps leading to the Ministry of Defense, it was just another Tuesday. At 42, with 20 years of service behind him, Elias had the kind of stillness that came from a lifetime of watching. He stood in his dress blues, the polished brim of his cap shielding his eyes, his posture a rigid line against the chaotic weather. His world was one of controlled variables, entry points, identification badges, and the micro-expressions on the faces of the thousands of people who streamed past his post every day. The heavy oak and glass door behind him led to a world of power and policy, but Elias's domain was the outside. He noted the nervous twitch of a junior clerk, the confident stride of a general, the tired shuffle of a cleaning lady. Today, the rain had thinned the crowds, leaving the wide plaza before him slick and empty, a mirror reflecting the dark sky. The only sound was the hiss of tires on wet asphalt and the rhythmic thump of the windshield wipers on the official vehicles lining the curb. That's when he saw the van. It was a plain white delivery van, the kind that was 1,000 times over in a city this size. Nothing special. But it was parked in a restricted zone, directly across the street, its engine running. Elias's gaze sharpened, his mind automatically logging the details. No visible company logo. And the windows were tinted too darkly, illegal for a commercial vehicle. It was too clean, too anonymous. His focus on the van was broken by a small, frantic movement at the edge of his vision. A little girl, no more than 6 or 7 years old, was running towards the van. She was soaked to the bone, her dark hair plastered to her face, her thin cotton dress clinging to her legs. She wasn't wearing a coat or shoes, her small, bare feet slapped against the wet pavement. She was clutching something to her chest, a tattered, one-eyed teddy bear. Elias's instincts, honed over decades, went from a low hum to a sharp, immediate alert. A child, alone, in a storm, running for an anonymous van. This was not a normal variable. He saw the van's side door slide open from the inside just as the girl reached it. A hand, pale and adult. I reached out and grabbed her by the arm, starting to pull her inside. "Hey!" The shout was out of Elias's mouth before he'd even made the conscious decision to move. He was already descending the steps, his pace quick and powerful, his eyes locked on the scene. "Stop! You there!" The hand paused for a fraction of a second, then yanked the girl harder. Her small face, turned towards Elias for a moment, was a mask of terror. It wasn't the scared look of a child being called in for dinner. It was the primal, wide-eyed fear of prey. That look was all Elias needed to see. He broke into a full sprint, crossing the deserted street in seconds, the rain soaking his uniform. He reached the van just as the door was sliding shut. He slammed his palm against the metal. "Police! Military police! Open this door!" he bellowed. Then his voice a thunderclap that cut through the storm. There was no response from inside. He could hear a muffled scuffle, a high-pitched whimper quickly stifled. He banged again, harder. "I am ordering you to open this door now!" The van's engine revved. It was going to flee. In that split second, Elias's brain calculated the odds. He could try to grab the door handle, but it was recessed. He could try to block the van with his body, but at this speed, he'd be crushed or flung aside. His mind, trained for escalation of force, flipped through its protocols. A suspicious vehicle, a snatched child, an imminent flight. The situation had rocketed past a simple welfare check. He took 2 steps back, his hand going to his hip. He didn't draw his sidearm, the standard-issue pistol. Instead, his fingers closed around the stock of his more formidable tool, his M4 rifle, slung across his back under his raincoat. In one fluid, practiced motion, he unslung the weapon, shrugged off the entangling coat, and brought the rifle to bear on the van's rear tires. The weight of the cold steel in his hands was a familiar comfort. He was no longer Sergeant Vance, the ceremonial guard. He was Sergeant Vance, the soldier. The van lurched forward, its tires squealing on the wet road. Elias's world narrowed to the sight picture. The van was a moving threat, a vessel of unknown danger containing a child. He had a clear shot. His finger rested on the trigger guard, the pressure of a lifetime of training telling him to fire, to disable the vehicle, to stop the abduction. And then he saw it. Through the rain-streaked back window of the van, a small face appeared. It was the little girl. She was pressed against the glass, her small hands leaving smudges on the cold surface. Her mouth was open in a silent scream. For a fleeting second, her eyes met his. It was a look not of hope, but of desperate, pleading terror. In that moment, everything else faded. The rain, the city, the protocol. There was only that face and the decision in his own hands. He could fire and risk hitting her if the bullet passed through the van's thin metal skin. He could hold his fire and let the van disappear into the labyrinthine city streets, taking the girl to a fate he didn't dare imagine. The van's engine roared, and it began to pull away, gaining speed. Elias made his choice. It wasn't a decision born of logic, but of a deeper, more primal instinct. He lowered the rifle from the tires and raised it, aiming squarely at the back window above the little girl's head. He took a breath, let half of it out, and squeezed the trigger. The sharp, concussive crack of the rifle split the air. The back window of the van exploded inward in a shower of safety glass. The van swerved violently, its tires losing traction on the slick road. It careened to the left, jumped the curb, and slammed into a massive concrete planter in front of the neighboring bank, its engine coughing and dying with a hiss of steam. The sudden silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the drip of rain and the ticking of the van's hot engine. Elias was already moving, his rifle still up, his legs pumping. He approached the wreck from the driver's side, his weapon trained on the cabin. "Military police! Show me your hands! Show me your hands now!" The driver's side door creaked open. A man stumbled out, dazed, a gash on his forehead bleeding into his eyes. He was middle-aged, dressed in nondescript clothes. He didn't look like a monster. He just looked like a man. He raised his hands, blinking in the rain. Behind him, the van's side door was jammed shut from the impact. Elias didn't let his guard down. He could hear sirens in the distance, finally responding to the commotion. Backup was coming, but for now, it was just him. "On the ground! Face down! Now!" he roared, his voice leaving no room for argument. The man complied, dropping heavily into a puddle. Elias quickly cuffed him with a plastic restraint from his belt, then moved cautiously to the side of the van. He could hear crying from inside. When he grabbed the handle of the sliding door and, with a tremendous heave, forced it open. The interior of the van was dim. There were no packages, no delivery goods. The space was empty except for a dirty mattress on the floor and a small, overturned cardboard box. And there, huddled in the corner, was the little girl. She was clutching her teddy bear, her small body shaking with sobs. She was terrified, but she was alive. She was whole. She looked up at him, and the fear in her eyes was slowly being replaced by a dawning, bewildered relief. Elias lowered his rifle, the tension in his shoulders easing just a fraction. He held out a hand, his voice softening to a gentleness that seemed impossible from the man who had just fired a rifle and wrestled a suspect to the ground. "It's okay, sweetheart. You're safe now. My name is Elias. Can you come with me?" The little girl looked at his outstretched hand, then back at his face. She didn't move. The sirens were getting closer, a wailing crescendo. Suddenly, the relative quiet was shattered by a new sound, a woman's scream, raw and primal, cutting through the storm. "Lily! Lily!" Elias turned. A woman was running across the plaza from the direction of a bus stop. She was disheveled, her clothes askew, her face a wreck of tears and rain. She ran with the uncoordinated desperation of someone whose entire world had just been ripped apart. She was heading straight for the van. A patrol car skidded to a halt nearby, and 2 officers jumped out, immediately moving to intercept her. "Ma'am, stop! You can't go over there!" one of them shouted, grabbing her arm. The woman fought against him, and her eyes fixed on the open van door. "That's my daughter! They took her! They took my Lily!" At the sound of her mother's voice, the little girl in the van stirred. "Mama," she whispered, her voice small and broken. She scrambled to her feet and stumbled out of the van, past Elias, and ran towards the sound. "Mama!" The patrolman let the woman go, and she fell to her knees, scooping the little girl into her arms. They clung to each other, a single sobbing shape in the middle of the wet street, the rain washing over them. The woman, whose name Elias would later learn was Sarah, buried her face in her daughter's wet hair, murmuring words of love and terror and relief. The little girl, Lily, just held on, her teddy bear crushed between them. Elias stood apart, watching the reunion. The adrenaline that had fueled him was beginning to ebb, leaving a profound weariness in its wake. He reholstered his weapon, the action feeling heavy and final. More police were arriving, cordoning off the area. Paramedics rushed to Sarah and Lily, wrapping them in shock blankets and ushering them towards an ambulance. A detective approached Elias, his notepad out. Elias gave his statement in a calm, measured tone, recounting the events. The van, the girl, the shot, the crash. He was a professional, reporting facts. But his eyes kept drifting to the ambulance, where he could see the small silhouette of Lily, wrapped in a silver blanket, being checked by a medic. He saw her turn her head, looking for something. Her gaze found him, still standing in the rain by the wreck. She didn't smile. She just looked at him, a long, solemn look from a child who had just seen too much. But then she gave him a tiny, almost imperceptible nod and clutched her bear tighter before her mother pulled her into the back of the ambulance. The doors closed. The ambulance drove away, its lights flashing silently in the rain. Elias stood there for a long moment, the storm soaking him to the bone. The questions would come, the official inquiries, the paperwork, the inevitable media storm. But in that moment there was only silence and the rain, washing the scene clean. He had seen the face in the window, and he had acted. The cost of that action, the potential for disaster, the sheer, terrifying luck of it all, was just beginning to dawn on him. He had fired his weapon in a crowded city. He had risked everything. But as he watched the ambulance disappear into the gray curtain of rain, he knew, with a certainty that went deeper than training or protocol, that he would do it all over again. The subsequent days were a blur of debriefings and internal reviews. Sergeant Vance became a reluctant celebrity. The story of the Royal Guard who stopped a kidnapping was a perfect news cycle gift. His picture was in every paper, his name on every broadcast. The ministry, ever conscious of its public image, lauded his bravery while quietly reminding him that shooting at a fleeing vehicle was technically against protocol. The investigation revealed the driver to be part of a small amateur trafficking ring, and Lily was thankfully not their first, but potentially their last, victim. She was safe. That was the headline. But for Elias, the story was far from over. A week later, a formal-looking letter arrived at his small apartment. It was an invitation on heavy, embossed paper to the home of Sarah and Lily for a private dinner. It was a gesture of thanks, Sarah wrote, from a grateful mother. Elias almost declined. He was a soldier, not a hero. He had done his job. But something, perhaps the memory of that solemn little nod from the ambulance, made him accept. The house was a modest one in a quiet suburb. Sarah greeted him at the door, her smile warm but her eyes still holding a trace of the trauma they'd endured. She thanked him, her voice thick with emotion, and led him inside. The house was filled with the smell of home-cooked food, a stark contrast to the sterile world Elias usually inhabited. And there, sitting on the living room floor, was Lily. She was dressed in clean pajamas, her hair dry and brushed. She looked smaller than he remembered, more fragile. The teddy bear, now cleaned and with its one eye sewn back on, was tucked under her arm. She looked up as he entered, and this time she did smile. It was a small, shy smile, but it transformed her entire face. During dinner, the conversation was light. Sarah talked about her job, about how Lily loved to draw. Lily, for her part, was quiet, occasionally peeking at Elias from behind her glass of milk. After the meal, as Sarah prepared coffee, Lily slid off her chair and walked over to Elias. She held out a piece of paper. It was a crayon drawing. There was a big gray building, the ministry, Elias guessed. A lot of blue rain. A white van crashed into a flower pot, and a tall figure in a blue uniform with a rifle. In the corner, a small girl with a teddy bear was waving. Elias looked at the drawing, a lump forming in his throat. It was a child's rendering of the most terrifying moment of her life, but the expression on the figure of the girl was not one of fear. She was waving. She was saying thank you. "His name is Elias," Lily said, pointing to the soldier in the drawing. "He's my giant." Sarah came back in, saw the drawing, and had to turn away to wipe her eyes. Elias carefully folded the paper and put it in his breast pocket, over his heart. He knelt down, bringing himself to Lily's level. "That's the best present anyone has ever given me, Lily. Thank you." In the months that followed, Elias became a regular, if quiet, presence in their lives. He'd stop by after his shifts, sometimes with a small toy or a new book for Lily. He helped Sarah fix a leaky faucet and mow the overgrown lawn. He was a rock of quiet, capable strength. For Sarah, and he was a comforting presence, a living reminder that in a world that had suddenly turned monstrous, there was still protection. For Lily, he was simply her giant, a friend who told her stories about faraway places and made her feel safe. One afternoon, months after the incident, Elias took them to a quiet park on the edge of the city. It was a sunny, beautiful day, the kind that makes you forget the rain ever existed. They had a picnic, and Elias pushed Lily on the swings, her laughter ringing out clear and bright. As she ran off to chase a butterfly, Sarah sat down on the bench beside him. "She's doing so well," Elias said, watching Lily. Sarah nodded, her gaze also on her daughter. "Therapy helps, but you know what helps more? You. You gave her back more than just her life, Elias. You gave her back her trust. She sees you, and she knows that not all strangers are bad, that there are good people in the world." Elias was quiet for a moment, watching the small, joyful figure in the distance. "She gave me something too," he said, his voice low. "For 20 years I've been a soldier. I've protected buildings, convoys, officials. I've always known the why of my job, but I never really felt it. Not like this. Lily, she made it personal. She made it real." Sarah reached over and placed her hand on his. It was a simple, warm gesture. "Then I guess we saved each other in a way." Lily came running back, slightly out of breath, a smudge of dirt on her nose. She grabbed Elias's hand and tugged. "Come on, giant! You have to see the duck pond!" Elias let himself be pulled from the bench. He looked back at Sarah, and for the first time in a long time, he felt a sense of peace. The city, with its gray buildings and rigid protocols, was still there. The uniform still hung in his closet. But he was no longer just Sergeant Vance. He was also a giant, a protector, and a friend. And as he walked hand in hand with a little girl towards a sun-dappled pond, he knew that this simple, messy, terrifying, and beautiful thing called life was what he had been fighting for all along. The story that began with a shot in the rain had ended, not with a bang, but with the quiet laughter of a child, a sound more powerful than any rifle.